Okay, good morning, everyone. We're going to get started here. I'm seeing the attendees start to kind of plateau a bit, and we're at 9:02. So yeah, with that, I'll go ahead and kick this off. Good morning, and welcome to our second public work group meeting for the Zero-Emission Forklift Rulemaking. First, I'd like to thank everyone for attending today. Your participation in this meeting and throughout the entire process of the rule development is important to us because we need your ideas, your information, and your comments as we continue to shape and mold our regulatory approach. Please note that today's webinar and discussion are being recorded. Before we begin, I'd like to go over some logistics. The presentation, as well as the discussion paper we will be covering today, are attached as handouts for this webinar and posted to our program webpage as well. In terms of the format, staff will go through the entire presentation first, then we'll open up the meeting for discussion. There are two ways to make a comment or ask a question. You can use your raised hand feature, or alternatively, you may type your comment or question in the question and answer box that you see on your screen. That said, we will not respond to your comments and questions until after we go through the entire presentation. As such, the mics of all attendees will be muted by the organizer until the discussion portion of the webinar. When such time arises, we will alternate between raised hands and written comments and questions and respond in the order received. Please bear with us if we run into any technical issues along the way, as the platform is still a little bit new to us. We're not sure exactly how long this meeting will run, but we may run out of time before all comments have been heard and or addressed. So we encourage all stakeholders to contact us directly if you have more input that you'd like us to consider. You can find contact details on the last slide. So with that, we're going to do some quick introductions of the folks here on the CARB team. I'm going to turn on my camera real quick. So my name is David Igus. I'm an engineer, air resources engineer here at CARB, and I'm the staff lead for this rulemaking effort. And let me kick it over to Keith.
Hi, I'm Keith Roderick. I am a support staff for this rulemaking effort.
I'm David Chen. I'm a section manager here in the Mobile Source Control Division of the Air Resources Board, and I'm overseeing the development of this measure.
Okay, great, and good morning. My name is Kim Horoy-Rogalski. I'm the branch chief in charge of this rulemaking. We did a little bit of a reorg, and so I'm working on this rather than test CCAT. And just since I'm new to this effort, I wanted to tell you a little bit about who I am. I'm chief of the Mobile Source Reg Development Branch at CARB, and I've been at CARB for 24 years. And over the last couple decades at CARB, I've worked on a number of rulemakings, including the in-use off-road diesel vehicle reg, the phase 2 greenhouse gas standards, and more recently, our heavy-duty NOx omnibus standards and our heavy-duty inspection maintenance program. I'm an environmental engineer by training. And I just wanted to thank everyone for taking time to participate today. Really appreciate people taking time out of their workday to be here. And I want to encourage folks to really talk to us. Like, we've worked on a lot of rules at CARB, but you guys definitely know your own business, your own industry better than we do. And so we're going to be able to create a better program here the more you communicate with us. And in particular on this rulemaking effort, we've had a lot of great participation from a number of industry associations, including like the rental industry, but we haven't had a ton of participation from actual individual owners of forklifts, which are some of the main people that will be affected by this rule. So really encourage you, if you own forklifts and you're listening today, I really encourage you to reach out to us. We'd be happy to meet with you individually. If there's parts of the rule that seem ambiguous or that you don't think would work well for you, really encourage you to speak to us, because we won't know about your concerns unless you tell us. So I'm going to switch my camera off, but we'll be back on camera when we get to the part of the work group where we'll be taking questions and having discussion.
Great, thanks everyone. Okay, so here we go. For today's agenda, we'll go over the background of this measure and provide a status update on where we are in the regulatory process. We'll touch on our goals for feedback in this work group, go over the draft regulatory concept, provide some examples of fleet scenarios and how the regulation would apply to them, and finally, we'll talk about next steps. At the conclusion of the presentation, we're going to open up the floor for a discussion. So to start, I'll put a short refresher on the background of this measure. The purpose of the measure is to accelerate the deployment of zero-emission technology in forklifts. The measure has been identified in the state strategy for the State Implementation Plan, or SIP, the 2016 Mobile Source Strategy, and the Sustainable Freight Action Plan. And the measure also aligns with Governor Newsom's Executive Order N79-20, which directs CARB to develop strategies to achieve 100% zero emission from off-road vehicles and equipment operations by 2035, considering technological feasibility and cost effectiveness. As I believe most of you know, we had our last work group in August 2021. Since then, we've continued to meet with individual stakeholders and continue to receive feedback and input. Using the stakeholder input we have received so far, we have developed a discussion paper that details staff's updated regulatory concept, which is what we will be covering today. If you have not obtained the discussion paper yet, you can find it on the webinar control pane, as well as on meetings and workshops webpage for the zero-emission forklift rulemaking. Our next workshop is tentatively being planned for summer 2022, where we'll revisit the regulatory concept and cover other topics as well, such as estimated emission reductions and our cost analysis. Board consideration for this measure has been delayed until 2023 to provide staff additional time to work with stakeholders to refine the final proposal. Staff's primary goal for this work group is to hear from you, our stakeholders. Although we will be providing updates to our concept so far, we're hoping for plenty of discussion and dialogue. It might be challenging given the number of participants, but we'll manage the best we can. The discussion paper that is available to you details where we are at today with respect to the regulatory concept. We'll be summarizing the elements of the discussion paper during the presentation first, so that everyone can have a better understanding of the regulatory proposal and staff's intent. Following the presentation, staff will open up the floor for discussion. If you don't have an opportunity to provide your comments or questions today, we strongly encourage you to reach out to us individually. So since the last work group, there have been a number of changes to highlight. We will go through these changes in more detail over the course of this presentation. First, diesel forklifts have been removed from the scope of the regulatory concept. This is largely because such forklifts are already covered by CARB's in-use off-road diesel rule, and we anticipate that overlaying the two rules could add significant complexity. Therefore, staff is proposing to exclude diesels from this regulatory effort. I would like to note that, as I had mentioned before, under Executive Order N-79-20, CARB staff has been tasked with developing strategies to transition all off-road equipment to zero emission by 2035. The zero-emission forklift rule we're discussing today is one measure being pursued to further the goals of EO N-79-20, and CARB staff is planning another measure called the Targeted Manufacturer Rule that is likely to target electrification of many types of off-road equipment, including diesel forklifts. In addition, staff has revised the low-use provision concept. We've streamlined the fleet reporting requirements, added requirements for dealers, rental agencies, and manufacturers, and updated the small business provisions. So with that, I'll begin with the summary of the regulatory concept. The concept takes a multi-pronged approach with specific requirements for fleet operators, dealers, rental agencies, as well as manufacturers. This is because each of these entities plays a role in the deployment and usage of applicable forklifts. As before, the regulatory concept would apply to large spark ignition or LSI forklifts up to 12,000 pounds lift capacity. This would include forklifts fueled with propane, gasoline, alcohol fuels, and compressed natural gas, or CNG. Staff is proposing to exempt rough terrain forklifts, military tactical vehicles, pallet jacks, forklifts with telescoping booms, and forklifts that will be covered by a future rulemaking targeting equipment specifically at cargo handling facilities, as defined by the current mobile cargo handling equipment at ports and intermodal rail yards regulation. Lastly, staff is proposing to exclude diesel forklifts, which would continue to be subject to the in-use off-road diesel regulation. And as I mentioned before, these forklifts could be revisited in a future zero emission measure. In terms of performance requirements, I will start with those that apply to fleet operators first. Here's the basic proposed timeline of the requirements for fleet operators. Please note that these years have been moved back 1 year since the concept presented at the last work group to account for the delay in the measures board hearing date. Starting in 2026, fleet operators would no longer be allowed to acquire new LSI forklifts. Under very limited circumstances, they could be allowed to acquire model year 2025 or older LSI forklifts, but the specific details of such provisions are not covered in this presentation. However, the provisions can be found in section 3001D of the discussion paper and are open for discussion along with all other concepts being covered today. In addition, starting in 2026 and each year going forward, fleets would be required to retire their existing LSI forklifts that are 13 years or older. These requirements would be implemented on January 1st of each year through 2038, when model year 2025 LSI forklifts are ultimately retired. Here you can see an additional slide explaining how the LSI forklift retirement would work. You can see that in 2026, 2013 and older model year LSI forklifts would be required to be retired. In 2027, 2014 model year forklifts would need to be retired, and so on. And so this would continue one model year at a time until 2038, when model year 2025 LSI forklifts would be required to be retired. For the fleet retirement provisions, staff is proposing a more streamlined reporting requirement relative to what was presented at the previous work group. A fleet operator would still be required to provide a comprehensive initial report containing company information, contact information, and information for any LSI forklifts within the fleet. This would essentially serve as the snapshot of the fleet for the purpose of the phase out. Except for forklifts that would otherwise qualify for an exemption, all other model year 2025 and older forklifts with the fleet should be included in the snapshot. The fleet operator would be required to provide a brief annual report, but information about forklift retirements would not need to be included. What would be required in the annual reports are any changes to company or contact information and an attestation that the fleet operator understands its obligations under the regulation. Lastly, fleets would be required to submit a final report once they've retired all applicable LSI forklifts. Reporting would be completed through the DOORS online reporting system, which is already being used today for the current LSI and off-road diesel fleet regulations. And any forklifts already reported indoors would be able to use their existing EIN, or equipment identification number, so that it would not need to be relabeled. The concept would allow fleet operators to rent LSI forklifts, but only to a limited degree. This is intended to allow fleets to deal with unforeseen circumstances or short-term seasonal workload increases, while minimizing the risk of fleet operators using LSI forklift rentals to avoid transitioning to zero emission. The rental allowance would allow a fleet to have rentals up to 30 days per calendar year. So any day that a fleet rents at least one forklift would count towards one of those days. Fleets would need to report into doors in advance of their rental and would provide the rental agency with a document or certificate produced through the door system. In addition, fleets would be required to provide an attestation to the applicable rental agency that the LSI forklift is being rented in accordance with the regulations rental allowance. Expanding on what was discussed at the August workgroup meeting, staff has included additional details for the low use exemption concept in the current discussion document. What staff is proposing is to allow fleets a limited number of low use LSI forklifts, defined as forklifts that operate less than 200 hours per year. Fleets would only be allowed to have up to 10% of their fleet as low use forklifts. For example, a fleet with 20 total forklifts would be allowed to have 2 low-use forklifts. Hour meter readings for each low-use forklift would be required to be reported into doors annually, along with a photo of the hour meter. And each low-use forklift would be required to be labeled. This exemption would eventually sunset in 2031, except for microbusinesses. Microbusinesses would continue to be allowed to use one low-use forklift indefinitely. The criteria for qualifying as a microbusiness follows on the next slide. So for the definition of microbusiness, staff is proposing to align with an existing definition codified in California Government Code 14837. A microbusiness is defined as one that has 25 or fewer employees and $5 million or less in annual gross receipts. Microbusinesses would be required to report to CARB annually and maintain at the facility where they operate their forklifts documentation that demonstrates their conformance with the microbusiness criteria. Many businesses that start out as a microbusiness will eventually grow to the point that they are no longer considered a microbusiness. Those businesses would ultimately lose any flexibilities provided to a microbusiness, but the specific concept for handling such transitions has not yet been developed. If workgroup attendees have suggestions for handling this transition, we welcome them. As mentioned earlier, staff is proposing new requirements for dealers and rental agencies. Dealers and rental agencies would not be allowed to sell or rent out 2026 or newer model year LSI forklifts. However, they still would be allowed to sell or rent out model year 2025 or previous LSI forklifts. Specifically, dealers would be allowed to continue selling model year 2025 and older LSI forklifts to fleet operators that can utilize them as low-use forklifts. And rental agencies would be allowed to continue renting out model year 2025 and older LSI forklifts to fleet operators renting those forklifts under the 30-day rental allowance. If a fleet rents an LSI forklift, the rental agency would be required to collect the listed information from the renter. And at the end of the year, dealers and rental agencies would be required to submit to CARB an annual summary of all of their LSI forklift transactions. Staff is also proposing new requirements for forklift manufacturers. The current concept would establish a new zero-emission standard for forklift engines and require that no new LSI forklifts be produced for sale in California, starting with the 2026 model year. Manufacturers of zero-emission forklifts would also be required to report production and sales information annually and provide a basic warranty. The details of the warranty, including the term and covered warranted parts, have not yet been developed and are open for discussion. We would like to request input from workgroup attendees, particularly those of you who own or operate forklifts, regarding whether CARB should require a warranty for zero-emission forklifts, and if so, what it should cover and what its length should be. In addition, manufacturers would be required to have at least one authorized service and repair facility in California to support zero-emission forklifts. The main purpose of the warranty and service and repair facility requirements is to ensure that manufacturers are producing products that will perform reliably and be well supported once deployed. So, revisiting one of the topics we discussed at our previous work group, staff has revised the definition for rough terrain forklift, which, as I had mentioned earlier in the presentation, are excluded from the regulatory concept. Since the previous work group meeting, staff has identified certain standards developed by the American National Standards Institute, or ANSI, which define particular technical and safety specifications for what they refer to as rough terrain forklifts. These standards are listed on this slide. The current regulatory concept would require rough terrain forklifts to meet one of the cited ANSI standards and bear a label identifying the specific standard. In addition, the concept includes other supplemental criteria intended to help ensure forklifts other than rough terrain forklifts would not be inadvertently excluded from the regulation. Specifically, rough terrain forklifts would also be required to have a minimum front wheel rim diameter of 18 inches and be identified or marketed as a rough terrain forklift by the manufacturer. Lastly, staff would also like feedback on whether there is still a need to include an explicit exclusion for rough terrain forklifts if diesel forklifts are not included in the regulation. And just to provide some additional information about the aforementioned ANSI standards, they are all part of the ANSI B556.6, which are design and construction standards for a rough terrain forklift. They are required by safety regulations and are maintained by the American National Standards Institute and the Industrial Truck Standards Development Foundation. So now I'm going to present a few simple fleet examples that will help you better understand how the regulation requirements would work. The first is a fleet. They have 45 LSI forklifts, and they're evenly distributed between model year 2011 and 2025, meaning that 9 of them are model year 2013 or older. And as a reminder, the reason I mentioned model year 2013 is because the first year that the requirements begin is 2026, when 2013 and model year older forklifts would be required to be retired. So for this fleet, let's look at how the phase-in requirements would affect them. In 2026, this fleet would be required to retire their 9 model year 2013 and older LSI forklifts. And each year after that, 3 additional LSI forklifts would come due for retirement until 2038, when their last 3 LSI forklifts would need to be retired. Also, because they have 45 forklifts, this fleet would be allowed to keep 10% of their fleet, or 5 forklifts, as low use until 2031. Note that the concept allows fleets to round up when determining the number of low-use forklifts permitted. Okay, here's another fleet example. this fleet has 27 forklifts total, 14 forklifts from model year 2017 and 13 forklifts from model year 2025. And in addition, the fleet has a seasonal need for extra forklifts every December. So because their oldest forklifts are from the model year 2017, they would not need to turn over anything until the year 2030, at which point their 14 model year 2017 forklifts would need to be retired. Then it wouldn't be until the year 2038 that they would be required to turn over their model year 2025 forklifts. In addition, the 30-day rental allowance would allow them to rent extra forklifts from December 1st to the December 30th every year. They would also be able to keep 10% of their fleet, or 3 forklifts, as low use until 2031. And the last example is a fleet, is a micro business, which has 1 model year 2020 LSI forklift. The fleet would qualify as a micro business because they have 25 or fewer employees and $5 million or less of annual gross receipts. So the micro businesses model year 2020 forklift would be required to turn over in 2033. However, because they are a micro business, they could continue to keep it as a low use, using it 200 hours or less per year indefinitely, as so long as it's labeled and reported. All right, so before concluding the presentation portion of this work group meeting, I want to take a moment to mention some of the topics that we're specifically looking for feedback on. Of course, we're seeking comment on the overall draft regulatory concept and each individual element included in the discussion document. But I've included some additional questions on this slide that would help staff determine if there's a need to specifically address LSI forklift used in emergency operations or at remote work sites. And just to reiterate a question posed earlier in the presentation, is there a need for CARB to require warranties for zero-emission forklifts? And I'm just going to quickly go over a couple more small things. Here's the next steps after the workgroup meeting. We'll continue discussions with stakeholders through individual meetings. We're planning to have another workshop, a public workshop in summer of 2022. And the board meeting is scheduled for mid-2023. And here's the contact information for myself, David Igus, and my manager, David Chen. And if for more information and to keep up with the latest news about the rulemaking process, please visit our website. We'll be sending updates about future meetings to our email list, so please sign up if you still haven't already done so. And if you know others who may be interested in the rulemaking, please let them know. Lastly, we've included a link to the off-road zone, which contains general information on CARB's off-road equipment regulations. And so with that, we're about to begin the discussion portion of this meeting. Before we begin, I just wanted to remind all participants that this webinar and discussion are being recorded. Here's a slide that we showed earlier that explains the webinar controls that are available to you. On the top left corner of the control panel, you'll have the ability to mute and unmute yourself, as well as raise and lower your hand. To make a comment or ask a question, please use the raised hand feature. Alternatively, you have the option to type your comment or question into the question and answer box below. We'll alternate between written and verbal comments and questions and respond to them in the order received. If you have your hand raised, we'll announce your name and unmute you when it's your turn. So please be sure to unmute yourself as well. We ask that you identify your name and affiliation before making your comment or asking your question. If you have typed your comment or question in the question and answer box, We will mention your name and read the comment or question out loud when it's your turn. And we may ask for a clarification or additional information as well. And in such cases, we will unmute you so that you can expand or clarify your comments or questions. Please bear with us if we run into any technical issues, as the system is still relatively new to us. Okay, and give me 1 second here. We're gonna go back a slide to here. And with that, yeah, we can sort of start opening up for questions. So please go ahead and submit them. And let me see, I'm getting questions if we should go to break or take a quick break or just go straight into some questions. So I'm okay either way.
Okay, let's just go straight to questions. Thanks for the presentation, David. I guess I can take the first one. And folks are entering questions in writing, and we're going to read them out loud and give the answers so that everyone can benefit from the questions and answers. So Cindy Rittenhouse asked, does fleet include forklifts outside the state or just forklifts used in California? And the answer is this is just applicable to forklifts used in California, and the fleet definition specifies that. Thanks.
Okay, hold on, let me check. Is my camera on? Yes, okay. I guess we'll just go through a number of the written questions and then we'll kind of go to verbal questions, and then we'll come back to the list of written questions. So got a question here from Harmony Gates, and the first one was it's a two-part question. One was, although not required, will fleets be able to retire old forklifts if they want to keep their online inventory accurate? That's not something we actually have like discussed internally yet, but I mean, is that, I guess if that's a feature that you guys are looking for, we can certainly talk about it and see if we can make that happen. Her second question was, will zero-emission forklifts be required to be reported or only LSI fueled forklifts? And so on that one, it's like for the phase out of kind of the existing fleet, the zero-emission forklifts would not be required to be reported. But if you were going to claim a low-use exemption, then you would have to report your zero-emission forklifts, because there's a limitation on how many low-use forklifts you could have, and so we'll have to know kind of what your entire fleet looks like. The next question here that I'll go for, it says from Mark Feynman. The question was rental allowance. The 30 days, is that 30 days of operation or straight calendar days? And so that's just 30 days in the year that you're allowed to rent at least one forklift. It doesn't have to be straight calendar days. Oh, I see. Okay, so the question is, can we unmute Mark Feynman? I'd like to kind of get some clarification on his question.
Yeah, we could do that.
Thank you.
Mark is unmuted.
Okay.
Can you just give me a little bit more clarification on what you want in terms of what you're looking
David,
for?
quite often in a rental situation, especially a lot of times on construction sites, the truck may be rented and they're on site, but nobody actually operates it like for a week, and then all of a sudden they use it. Or the other thing is weekends. You know, are you getting penalized for, you know, you're closed 2 days or 3 days, depending on the operation? So that's more of the question, is how you would treat those types of situations, because you could use up the 30 days pretty quickly if it's straight calendar day.
Okay, no, that's a good question. I don't think we've actually like given that as much thought as we need to, but we'll note that comment and your question, and then yeah, we'll consider that. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you, Mark. And then the next question here I'll take is, if you're from Jose Ariola, if your fleet only has one LSI forklift, do you qualify for low use? And that is yes, because the measure concept would allow you to round up when you do that calculation. Thanks.
Just to clarify, that's through the year 2031.
For a non-micro business, yes, and then
Yeah, if you're a micro business per the definition, then you could keep it indefinitely.
okay. So I think that's 5 questions up from the written side. So maybe we should go and see if there are any raised hands.
Yes, we have several. Start with, excuse me, Harmony Gates. You are unmuted. Excuse me, let me try it again. Dave, I guess you may have to unmute Harmony. I'm unable to do, okay, there we go.
He's unmuted. Okay.
Okay.
Good morning. I just wanted to make sure I was clear on the definition of model year. Are we talking the body or the engine?
So the rule would account for both, and so and the reason there is to prevent someone taking like an older forklift and then just repowering it with a newer engine to extend it.
So when it says model year 2026, there's, when I go to buy a car, I can buy in September a vehicle that has the body style of next year, even though the engine is made this year. So I'm just want to make sure it's clear if the regulation is strictly about engine model years or the body style. In September of 2025, can I buy a 2026 LSI fueled forklift because the engine is manufactured in 2025?
I think I was under the impression that the on the off-road side, it doesn't mirror what happens on the on-road light duty side, where you can buy the next model year forklift in a year in advance or sometime in the previous model year. But if that's the case, certainly that's something we should think about and discuss internally how to handle. I think maybe it's like if there are any like dealers on the line, maybe if they can kind of provide some clarification there. Can you buy like a 2026 model year forklift in 2025?
Yeah, so
yeah, I think
I'd love to know if a dealer out there can clarify if they do that in current day sales, because that's something you definitely want to watch out for when you're writing the rule, if you need to make any caveat or asterisks on things. Definitely. And then I just had a follow-up question on example number 2. I didn't quite see much being explained of what would that fleet do. Is it just that 14 vehicles forklifts would need to be replaced by 2030 and 13 of them by 38? So they have to create their own little phase in for those 14 up until 2030?
Yeah, so that's right. So they would, if they wanted to do some sort of gradual phase in, it's something that they would have to take upon themselves. So if they waited till the last second, then yeah, they would have kind of a bigger push at that final year at which they have to turn over a number of forklifts.
Okay.
I think that's what you're asking, right?
Exactly. It's just, there was no trick. You were just showing, hey, if this is what your fleet looks like, that's how you're going to be impacted by this rule. And then for the rest of us out there, we see that that's what happens, and we need to come up with, okay, now what's our game plan? Because half of our inventory, we can't just shut down, and we can't just put the capital out in one bucket. So how are we going to transition? So, okay, and there's no prevention of going to diesel, that if they replace with diesel, they just now are impacted by the diesel regulation. So thank you. I just wanted to make sure I understood what you were showing here.
Okay, can we go to the next verbal question or next raised hand?
Yeah, Mark Roost. Your microphone is being unmuted.
Thank you. I'm Mark Roost. I'm the Director of Marketing and International Development with Sustainable Energy, Inc., and I'm on the advisory board of the Silicon Valley Clean Cities Coalition. I've been working extensively with drayage industry and trucking services center provider in the Bay Area. And so I see a very strong parallel between the implications of what you're saying and what the drayage trucking industry is being impacted by. Now, when I was a teenager, I worked in a cannery, and I will tell you that I never saw a forklift that was younger than 20 years old. And and canneries were basically low wage, low capital operations. They were highly competitive, as is the drayage industry. You have people who are also not valued and paid. So either the companies themselves do not have the social and economic clout of the larger companies, and you're telling them that they're going to be forced to do something that basically doubles the life cycle, the cost per year in the life cycle operating cost of that vehicle, which impacts their profitability significantly. In the case of drayage operation, it drastically impacts their profitability because they're not set up for that. They're set up, okay, I was given the list, the new company, and this may apply in parts of the off-road and on-road forklift operation as well, where the idea is that a new company would buy a truck and a new truck, and use it for 3 years on long haul. Then they'd turn around and sell it to someone doing short haul, regional, and then they'd turn around and sell it at 500,000 miles. They'd turn around and sell it to somebody else. So I don't know what the analogy is in the forklift, but I think the basic concept is still there. You are telling people that they have to switch. You're telling them to retire their vehicle, and you're failing to tell them that they can convert their vehicle not to another later engine. You're only thinking in terms of converting to a later diesel engine or a later engine year, CNG, whatever it is. But by 2023, there will be the ability to convert vehicles with long range batteries. By 2022 already, they're within, say, by the end of this year, if you were to incentivize it, there is a company that does conversions of trucks and buses, which could do conversions, which could design and do a prototype of conversions for various kinds of forklifts. In fact, by 2025, it's that 18-inch wheel might turn out to be handy, because by 2025 we may be in production of wheel motors that are based on a gearless wind turbine generator. So you have any thoughts about any of what I've said so far?
I'll chime in here, and if anybody else wants to add to it, I guess they can just jump in later. So I think what you were saying is, would we allow conversions? Is that like your primary question?
Given that I've been, okay, it's 2/3 of the question, but the other third is still there because of cash flow.
Okay.
You need to think about a tort, okay, about making somebody whole. Now CARB is on two fronts here. CARB is doing something that will damage the smaller, low-income, disadvantaged community-based competitors. It will damage them vis-a-vis their competition. And given the fact that they get low rates, they don't make as much money. They're razor-thin margins. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
So what you should be doing in terms of, if you're to take the same standard that torts have, that civil actions have, is you should be making them whole. And the way you can make them whole is two things. One is to ensure that financing at low interest rates or zero interest rates is available for them. And another thing is to incentivize, because if the conversions are able to be made, to be designed and certified by you by the end of 2023, for instance, or even earlier in 2023, depending on whether there's some funding that could be provided to the company that's doing the trucks and buses to do a dedicated effort, then we can turn it over far earlier, and we don't have to wait for the annual, you can, instead of retiring them, you can convert them years earlier, because actually what's going to happen is that their economic position is going to be better if they convert with a no net negative cash flow. In other words, if they convert with financing that is based on their savings, then they will be better off instead of worse off.
Okay, so I'll just say let me start off by saying, so I think, like, from what we understand, for these zero emission forklifts is that, if you use it enough, you're going to get an ROI eventually,
What's that mean?
5 years, a return on investment. So you're going to take up the extra cost, right? The incremental cost, because through fuel and maintenance savings. So I'll just say that, but I understand there's this capital cost that still has to be kind of fronted by a business, right? So and so one of the things that we talked about earlier in the presentation was potential flexibilities for micro businesses. I'm not sure if the companies you're talking about would fall under the definition that we have for micro business, but
many would.
Okay, so
many would, but the thing is that there could be companies that have grown bigger, but they're still operating on razor thin margins, and therefore the operating cost, the ROI, actually depends on the number of years. Just like the levelized cost of energy depends on the number of cycles you can use that thing before you get rid of it.
Right. My first thing, what I'll say is that I encourage these companies to come talk to us, or at least we want to hear more about kind of the challenges. Like right now in the actual concept, we have this the one flexibility we've provided is the one flexibility we provided was that they would be able to have a low use forklift indefinitely, but that's not to say we're not open to other flexibilities for micro businesses. So but in order to figure out kind of what's needed there, we need them to come talk to us. Honestly, we haven't had a lot of fleets approach us in general, and especially on the small and the micro business side. So if contacts, if you could let them know, pass along our information and have them contact us, we'd love to talk to them.
Because we've been focused on trucks, we do not have contacts in that industry yet, and they wouldn't even know we exist. I mean, they have no clue that there's a possibility of repowering. That's not in the market yet. And so what I'm talking about is analytically we can and I'm the contact person for this, because I'm the marketing person for our battery and solar company, which is the infrastructure, but I'm working with an ally who is and he's in Florida, who is the guy who's doing the conversion development, and he converted a Bluebird school bus 7 years ago. So he's been doing conversions for a long time.
Okay, well, let me say one more thing, and then I'll address the conversion question you have, or the point you made about conversion. So on the incentive side, we are also looking for incentives, or making incentives available. Moyer, the Car Moyer program, which currently has made some guideline changes that should make it more accessible to zero emission today. It wasn't the easiest to get zero emission equipment funded previously, but I know from what I understand, they made some recent guideline changes should make that a little bit should lower that hurdle for zero emission technology. And we're also talking to the folks that manage the Clean Off-Road Equipment Voucher Incentive Project, which is a zero emission voucher program for off-road equipment and possibly providing some funding there for smaller businesses that want to buy the forklifts that fall under this regulation. On the low interest loan side, we have talked to the folks internally that manage our truck loan program. I wasn't sure exactly if that was something that was really needed for on the forklift side. We've talked to some folks and they've said, like, you know, a lot of dealers and manufacturers will provide zero interest loans to their customers. But, you know, if there is really a benefit there, we'd love to hear about it, and we'd love to talk about it more. That's something we can look into and work towards on our side.
The benefit there would be that we're cutting out dealers. Okay, see, we are saying instead of buying new, convert, and you will get. Okay, you look at how rugged a forklift body is. Okay, it's not going away. So you retire something, and it's either going to go to Mexico or it's going to get melted down.
Oh. Yeah, we can talk about that offline. I think, you know, we need to kind of move on, and I just want to say one more thing on the conversion side. You know, come talk to us separately offline. That's not something we at least was aware that was being done. But if it is an option, you know, I would just recommend you reach out to us offline, and we can discuss that in more detail. But,
thank you very much, David.
Yeah, thank you. So can we go to the next verbal question?
Sure. We'll go to Brian Harris. Trying to unmute his mic. For some reason, I'm not able to. Could somebody else try?
Okay, and while Keith is working on that, let me go ahead and answer one of the questions from the written questions. So Gokul Vishwanathan asked, could you please provide more information on new zero-emission LSI forklifts? Which fuels are allowed here for this regulation, and are you implying near zero-emission forklifts? The way the proposal is structured, it's all about phasing out the spark ignition forklifts, including preventing purchasing new ones, and then there's a phase out for sort of getting rid of the ones that people already own. So we don't have any explicit requirements in there for use of zero-emission forklift, although of course the goal is transitioning the fleet to zero-emission forklift. We do have a definition for zero-emission forklift that's a forklift using a fuel cell electric, battery electric, or other zero-emission technology as the only source of power for operational propulsion and work. So we aren't contemplating any kind of near zero definition. It's all about zero, like no tailpipe. Okay, but thank you for the question.
Okay, Brian Harris, you can unmute yourself and talk, and please state your name and affiliation for the record. Thank you.
Yes, my name is Brian Harris, and I'm the Director of Sales for Pape Material Handling. We are a forklift distributor on the West Coast with many locations in California. And you had a question earlier about the model year and how we as a lift truck entity know when a lift truck is manufactured. And the answer is, for us, the unit serial number actually has a code identified on it that tells us the exact year that the forklift is actually manufactured. And on January 1st, that code changes, at least for the brands that we represent. So it's actually very easy to look at a serial number and say that was made in 2012 or 13 or 14 or 15. So it's not a model year as we understand the automotive industry, but in the industrial world, the serial number drives the bus.
So do we need to have a decoder for those serial numbers, or is there some way to read it, I guess, universally?
I'm going to say I think each manufacturer, whether it be Crown, Raymond, Toyota, Hyster, Yale, Hyundai, whoever, probably has a means of their own way of identifying that. For our brands, it's a letter, but for some, it could be a serial number sequence that says this sequence were the units made in a particular year. But you could probably have that supplied by the various manufacturers so there actually be no question about what units fit within a certain year range.
So is it possible to buy, would it be possible to buy a 2025 model year forklift in 2020 or 2026 forklift in 2025? Based on what you're
No.
saying, it sounds like no, right? Because it's
No.
based on the date of manufacture.
Correct. It's based on the date the forklift is manufactured. Now, arbitrarily, if you had a forklift built in a foreign country, especially where you have shipping, you could have a 2025 forklift manufactured overseas, call it in September, but because of shipping the unit over, it could not be delivered potentially to the United States until 2026, where it's finally resold. So you could have that type of scenario happen, but you can't go backwards. You can't buy a 26 in the previous year.
Right. Okay. No, thank you. Thank you for that clarification. Appreciate it.
One more question. Do you know like where on the forklift that's typically shown?
Each forklift immaterial brand has identification plate. I'll call it on the dash. It tells you about the forklift, has the model and the serial number. It's that serial number that is going to give us, for us, is going to give us our date code for us. It's a letter that's associated at the very end of the serial number, and that letter to us references a particular year. But that's the way Hyster and Yale does it, and other manufacturers probably have a slightly different way of managing that process.
Thanks, Brian.
Okay.
So we do like one or two more of the phone raised hand questions, and then maybe jump back to verbal.
Okay. The next person we're going to unmute is Daniel Langman, I believe the last name is. Please unmute yourself and state your name and affiliation. Thank you.
Hi everyone, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. My name is Daniel Langman. I work for the Bay Area Air Quality Management District. So, you know, I just wanted to give a little input on my experience. So I work in the Carl Moyer program, and we often have to, you know, identify model year of the engine specifically. There's been a lot of talk about that. So, you know, in my experience on newer equipment, it's pretty straightforward because, you know, there's a EO issued, so that identifies which model year the engine is. I just wanted to give a little input also on, you know, in my experience, dealers, you know, when applicants are coming into the program, you know, they can search within existing inventory to get units. So even if it's 2026, they could theoretically, I've seen, you know, them provide, for example, a 2025 forklift to the program because that's, you know, available in the inventory in the United States. So that's just been my experience. I'm obviously not a manufacturer, so and one of the challenges that we run into with this model year identification is on the you know, on the older units. These, depending on what the forklift's doing, they can really get pretty, they're used, right? So they're beat up, serial numbers are worn off, engine labels are missing, you can't find it. So it kind of, you know, it really depends. And my assumption is that you all are going to be basing this off of self-reporting indoors, right? Like the model year of this equipment.
Yeah, they would have to report the snapshot of the fleet in terms of the phase out. They would have to report kind of the snapshot of the existing forklifts into doors. But in terms of like verifying compliance, it would be, yes, the model year label. Was that your point? I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I'm just wondering, it sounds like you're trying to figure out potentially how to define the model year more specifically. But, you know, that will essentially be kind of on the, you know, the entities that this applies to, right? They'll figure it out and they'll put it indoors, and that's what everything will be based on. So
Right.
The question is, how do you figure that out, right? And how do you define that more effectively? It kind of sounds like to me.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, we we use a lot of different methods for that. The Moyer guidelines, for example, require us to base it off of the engine family number if it's available, and then next we go to the serial number, to kind of figure that information out. So it would probably, I would recommend a combination of something along that line, the EO, whatever year that's issued for, and the serial number decoding. However, on older equipment, companies have been sold multiple times, and like I said, a lot of times it's worn off on this older stuff, so it can be kind of challenging to figure that out. So I would just kind of be cautious with that.
One of the provisions in the concept is that whoever owns that forklift will have to maintain those engine labels and the forklift label. Not sure if those are easily accessible or purchasable or some replaceable through the manufacturer or dealer. But that is something we are concerned about, is that these labels do get worn off or somehow fall off over time. So we do have that
not installed in a friendly place, and you
okay.
have to lift the engine out of the forklift to be able to find that or the serial number. So again, on some of these older ones, it's a little, I would say it would be a little more challenging. So that's not everything, right? It's just, and I'm actually curious if you've done an inventory on how many, a projected inventory and how many of these older LSI, vehicles there are out there. Because, for example, in like the warehouse industry, we've seen that this has already been done a lot, in that industry, for example, but, more specific to like food and shipping and stuff like that. But, like material handling, those kind of operations, there seems to be more of it in that industry. So I'm just curious if there's an idea of how many. I mean, obviously there probably is. I was just wondering if you know how many are potentially in the state.
Yeah, we have been doing some assessment work, and we're in the process of actually updating the inventory, but we're actually not ready to talk about it at this meeting.
Okay, yeah. Sorry.
But no, thank you. You made a lot of good points. Something we definitely want to look into is like, is it going to be easily? Are we going to be able to identify kind of what model year these forklifts are in use? So I appreciate your comments.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And what we would tend to do is be more conservative, right? So if there's a question of, okay, well, this may be right, older, then that's what we would go with. So, and on our end. So I guess that would be, my recommendation, of course.
All right. Thank you.
Should we jump back to some written questions? It looks like there's a queue of both written and hand raises. So I think if we jump back.
Hey, David, I guess there's a question here about a statement you made on slide 17 from Harmony Gates.
Yeah, that was asked during the presentation.
Well, David, I guess is working on pulling that up. I can take another short one. So Alvin Chu asks, my company has forklifts at a port facility. We talked to CARB and they said that our forklifts are propane, so we follow LSI instead of cargo handling. So I'm confused. Do we follow the phase out for LSI or cargo handling? Thanks for the question. You should follow the cargo handling rule. We are explicitly exempting any forklifts covered by the cargo handling rule. And we have language in there saying that affected forklifts do not include forklifts subject to the cargo handling rule. But if you're getting conflicting information, please reach out to us individually and we can set up a quick chat just to make sure we can get the person you spoke to on the phone and just make sure we're giving you clear guidance. So thanks for the question.
So Kim, I'm just going to add a little bit more clarification here, if you don't mind.
Of course.
So we're talking about the forklifts, even LSI forklifts that operate at those facilities. I mean, right now, I believe the cargo handling rule only impacts diesels, but they are planning to do a zero emission rule there that will include the LSI forklifts as well. And so that's why we're not actually addressing them in this rule, because they're going to include them in their rule when they develop it.
Thanks, David.
Thank you. I guess, are you ready to respond, or should I take
Yeah,
the next?
slide 17 again. It's somewhat of a lengthy slide, but dealers and rental agencies would not be allowed to sell or rent out 2026 for newer model year LSI forklifts. They would still be allowed to sell or rent out model year 2025 or previous LSI forklifts. But dealers would be able to continue selling those 2025 and older LSI forklifts only to fleet operators that can utilize them as low-use forklifts. And rental agencies would be able to continue renting out their 2025 and older LSI forklifts to fleet operators renting forklifts under the 30-day rental allowance. There's a couple other statements in there, but that's probably the part where you had trouble following. So just, you can shoot a question if you need, and we can respond.
Oh, this is Harmony. I was the one who sent that question in.
Yep.
So basically the rental company can continue to rent them out, but it's the operator who will be responsible to make sure that if they're adding a rental, that their fleet is compliant, whether it's adding it because it's still in the 10% low use, or their 10% allowance, or whatever fleet requirements there are. But would the rental company need to do any due diligence that I'm going to rent you this equipment, you have to make sure you're compliant? Like, where does the obligation fall of who's making sure that rental is okay to be rented?
Yeah, so they would need, so I think what we were thinking is the fleets would have to go and submit a request in like a CARB database like DOORS, and they would need to attest to the dealer that they're doing it in compliance. And then at the end of the year, there would sort of be a double check from both ends in terms of the dealer needing to submit their documentation on who they rented it to, and that should be able to match up with the information that the fleets are reporting as well. But at the point of sale, it's mostly going to be on the fleet to self-manage, make sure they're in compliance. At the end of the year, it's going to come out if there was any sort of non-compliance going on.
So for rentals that are in the 30-day window, or rentals that would be added to their low use 10% range, would that only be dealt with in terms of reporting at the annual attestation period, or would the inventory online need to be updated? You know, like in the diesel world, it's within 30 days of fleet changes.
I see.
Is that addressed in your draft language?
I don't believe it is. I think it's something we need to work through with a little bit more detail, but I think what you're talking about is just basically having the reporting system keeping track for you and letting you know right then and there whether you can go ahead and take another day, for example. Yeah, I would say those details are still being worked out. I don't know if anyone wants to add anything, please do, but yeah.
I guess my last little comment to that, I'm a consultant. I work with like 40 different fleets, you know, during reporting season. So some companies like having their online system be able to do the work for them. So they go in and they only have 10 units or 15 units, something kind of reasonable, that they update it. And that's literally what they use for inventory tracking. I ask them for a spreadsheet, they print out the doors and send it to me. They don't maintain their own spreadsheet. They can't, you know, it's some kind of administrator at the facility, not an environmental compliance manager who's doing it. So some companies love the online system because that's what they use to keep up to date what they are. Then you have some other companies that are larger and they have their fleet that's tracked diesel, PERP, and LSI all in one place, and they issue little reports at the end of the year, give it to me, and then we just make sure that online systems match their inventory. So it's not to say I want it one way or the other. You're just going to have some companies who want online to be easy to maintain their own tracking through your system. Thank you for providing it. That's their concept. And then there's others who are like, don't bug me. I have 100,000 things to do. And at the end of the year for your reporting time, I will go do my homework just for you, but I don't want to have to maintain something every month on top of my already huge to-do list. So you're going to see both. And I just wanted you to be aware of that, not to say that I think it should be one way or the other. So if it can live as a place for someone to continuously update, that's awesome. But if the obligation is just to make sure once a year that we've crossed all our T's and dotted all our I's, I think that's somewhat of it helps both parties. So,
Okay,
thank you.
thanks, Harmony.
Harmony, I don't know if you did, obviously we've worked with you, but do you mind announcing your affiliation just for the record?
Oh yes, sorry, Harmony Gates, I'm with York Engineering.
Thank you, Harmony.
Thank you.
I'll take this next written question from Paul Dorn. It says, this is all proposed, right? And the answer is yes. We're still kind of just developing the proposal, I should say. And so this rule will actually be considered at our board hearing sometime in mid-2023. And so what we're doing here is crafting the proposal that we will be taking to our board. How many, let's see. Lisa, I'll take this one also. Lisa, maybe we already answered this one. Lisa Fashni, sorry if I pronounced your name wrong. The question was, if you rent an LSI forklift, is it limited to 30 days per forklift per calendar year? The response is it's just 30 days per calendar year, and with no limit on how many forklifts you rent on per day. And then, okay, Kim, I see you kind of claimed that next one. Kim, did you want to take that next one?
I don't know what you're seeing as the next one, but I can take one from
sorry,
Allison Claiborne, who asked, just to clarify, propane will not be acceptable as zero emission, and that's true. Propane doesn't count as zero emission.
Okay, the one I saw, Kim, was the question from Brian Liebert, which said, it sounds like diesel forklifts would be allowed to, will be allowed indefinitely after 2026. Is this true?
Yeah, I can take that one as well. Thanks for the question. Yeah, it's true that this rulemaking is not proposing to cover diesel forklifts. However, of note, diesel forklifts are already covered by the in-use off-road diesel vehicle reg, which has its own requirements for phasing out older equipment and moving to cleaner equipment. We also anticipate there's as David, I guess, mentioned, there's a statewide policy that the governor has put in place. It's one of the big reasons why we're proposing this measure, and our direction is to transition off-road equipment to zero emission by 2035 as much as possible. So we definitely expect there'll be additional measures pushing toward electrification for diesels as well. For example, we know we'll be working on manufacturer requirements for requiring manufacture of zero emission equipment in lieu of diesel. So sort of stay tuned on the diesel, but we are not covering them as part of this specific rulemaking.
The next question I see is from John Handley. It says, for the manufacturer's service and repair requirement, is the plan that the manufacturer has only a single repair facility for the entire state? That would be a hard non-starter for the industry. You need a service that can be on-site within the day, not scheduled for the next month. And John, yes, you're correct. That is how we proposed it. If you have I think it was sort of like, if there's if you have a particular need or from your manufacturer, then it's certainly up to the consumer to decide whether or not they want to go with that manufacturer. But that was kind of like set as a base minimum of what we would expect for a manufacturer. If you feel differently, you know, and you want to raise your hand and provide some further comment, please do, and we'll see that, and we can discuss. But Other than that, I think we need to keep moving.
So maybe we can go back to some of the raised hands.
Sure.
Okay, there's Jeff Pardini. Jeff, I'm going to unmute you, but it looks like because you're on a phone, you're going to have to type in a PIN. So the PIN should be being sent now. And when you get your PIN entered and unmute yourself, please state your name and affiliation. Thank you. Looks like Jeff is still unmuted, or still muted, sorry.
So Jeff, it says you need to enter your PIN to set up your audio for your microphone.
Is it possible to move on to the next raised hand and then
Sure.
let him figure it out? Yeah.
Sure. The next person in line is Tony Murray, sorry. Your microphone is unmuted. Please state your name and affiliation.
It's Tony Murray from American Rentals. Obviously, we're a rental house in Southern California. Can you clarify the 30-day exemption on rental? Are you saying 30 calendar days per forklift or per customer? So can we take the same forklift and if it's a short-term rental, 10, 20-day cycles during the year, different customers, is that acceptable?
Yes. You said different customers, 20 days per customer.
Different locations, yeah.
Yeah, if it's different customers, that's okay, yeah.
Okay. And then you had asked for some examples of instances where, one of the things we talked about in the first workshop is, it's not practical to bring, hook up a charger for a 1-week rental. So an example, like we're getting ready for the Long Beach Grand Prix, well, they'll take like 10 straight mast warehouse forklifts for 2 months just for setting that up. Now, obviously, it's not very remote, right? It's downtown Long Beach, but it's also not practical to set up chargers for a short-term deal like that. So I'm just throwing that out there as an example of something that we do, all of our competitors do almost daily.
I think what we'd like to kind of discuss is like, what are the potential solutions to that? I mean, in the end, we're driving hard to zero.
Sure.
And so, I think maybe, we just kind of sit down and kind of maybe discuss a little bit more about like, what are the solutions for those moving forward? I mean, I know there's, seems like there might be, it's different obviously than what we do today, but, also, maybe, reaching these goals probably will require a little bit different thinking and different approaches. So I think, if maybe we just need to kind of sit down and maybe talk out some of these issues a little bit more.
Is there anything allowing, past 2035 for those circumstances as well, where zero-emission forklift isn't going to work for a 3-day rental or 5-day use? It doesn't seem like there's nothing accounting for that.
So like, so right now the rentals are limited to the 2025 model year and older forklifts. Now, as long as those last, you could continue to rent them out at least, but like the way the concept is structured right now is that, everything kind of newer 2026 or newer is going to have to go zero. And so we are really looking for kind of the industry to be creative here and find solutions and help us find solutions to making this work long term.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, the next person is Gary Ma. I'm going to unmute you. Please state your name and affiliation before you start. Thank you.
Hi, microphone check. Can you guys hear me okay? All right, great. My name is Gary Ma. I'm with the Environmental Department at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. We are a United States Department of Energy laboratory. I wanted to talk about the low use exemption. I definitely have concern for our organization. Maybe it's limited. We're kind of a unique case, but just to throw out some of our numbers here, we have over 120 forklifts reported to CARB, LSI forklifts that we've reported to CARB through the DOOR system. About 1/3 of those are electric, 2/3 remaining are gasoline and propane. Out of those 2/3, 82% of them are low use. About 52% of our entire reported fleet are designated as low use. There's probably multiple reasons for that. I think maybe just the nature of how research projects come and go at the laboratory, and also how we're funded by the Department of Energy. But clearly, going from 52% down to 10% is going to be a pretty big challenge for us. So I just wanted to bring that up, that there's at least one facility, our facility, that would have a pretty big challenge getting down to that 10% of our fleet. Maybe an option that CARB staff would want to consider possibly is maybe a kind of a phase down for the low use. Maybe start at 40% 1 year and down to 30. It looks like the exemption would end in 2031. So maybe start at a percentage and then get down to 0 at 2031 would definitely be helpful for a facility like ours that has such a high percentage right now of low use. Maybe another option would be some kind of grandfathering in of certain low use. I just wanted to bring up the concern, and I think offline we can maybe have further conversations about how the low use provision would affect us.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. That's thank you for the comment. Is we'd like to kind of understand maybe more in detail of like, for example, what are the challenges of your fleet going zero in the time frame that we have in the concept document. So my recommendation is please just reach out to us offline so we can kind of go over kind of your fleet specifics, and so we can understand understand better the challenges that you face.
All right, thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to try Jeff Pardini one more time. Jeff, I'm going to send you a pin to enter so you can unmute your phone. Let us know if it works for you. Okay,
All
Jeff,
right.
great.
I'm here now. Thanks, guys.
Yeah. Okay, please state your name and affiliation.
Jeff Pardini, and I'm representing now the West Coast Lumber and Building Materials. I'm on the board of directors. We are 6.2 or 6.1 million in annual revenue and 82 million in sales tax for the state of California. And I have a few comments that may be helpful. One of your questions was on off-road forklifts, whether it should still be part of the exemption. And I believe it should be, because they're very specific use forklifts, very low use, and very specific use. I would say, the 18-inch rim diameter, I'm not necessarily sure of, but typically what they are is used on construction sites, or they're what they call piggyback forklifts that go on the back of trucks. They're used for, 5, 10, 15 minutes to unload materials off the truck, and then they go back on. They're not used a lot. So I think that exemption would be smart to keep that, even though most of the time they are diesel, but very specific use. So yes, I think that's a good idea to keep that. I sent some information to you guys to review based off of some sales from Holt to California, describing capacity uses. Now, Holt sells a lot of the heavier forklifts to the lumber industry and our building materials handling, so it was skewed towards the heavier lifts. But even still, when you went through the numbers, less than 10% of the lifts were over 7,000 pounds. So one suggestion I would like to put out there is exclude anything over 7,000 pounds. And then one other comment I would make, I was hearing about zero interest loans. I think that's really not a bad idea because not everybody has access to that. But another thing I was thinking about is if there's a way that California could put it into use is maybe give a 200% depreciation on new electric lifts to help companies finance it. It'll help them on their taxes. If there's a way you guys could help with that, maybe push that through, it would make it more digestible for people to upgrade their fleets. So those are just a few of my comments. Any questions?
No, thank you for the comment.
Yeah,
Jeff,
you're
I'll
welcome.
I probably want to circle back with you to talk about this this depreciation concept.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Okay, next we have Bob Shepard. Your mic is unmuted. Please unmute yourself and state your name and affiliation. Thank you.
Hear me okay? Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, good. Bob Shepard with Quinn. I just need some clarifications, mostly on the rental 30-day. We have hundreds and hundreds of rental contracts each year. I mean, literally lots of them. And there is no way to really track, hey, we've got a forklift that went out to XYZ company for 2 weeks and then come back later in the year and they rent for 3 weeks. There'd be no way for us to really track that it stays under the 30 days. The 30 days is going to be a very difficult thing to manage. I think we need to talk more about that. It's just a general comment, but I kind of need more clarification on that because when you get to an annual reporting, we're going to have thousands of transactions, and I don't know how that can even be put together to identify what we're doing. But I mean, those are just a couple of comments on that. Also asking for a renter to provide their doors ID and an attestation and all that. We need more discussion, I think, because I'm not sure how that's all going to be able to work out. Collecting anything from a customer is difficult, especially if it holds up on a rental. The other difficulty there is if we're asking a company too much, they go elsewhere, and if that other company that's renting or whatever isn't keeping as good a track, or let's just say they rented 30 days from us already, but now they go to another company, they rent another 30 days from that. I don't know how that's going to get tracked. So those are just a few comments on the rental side that are of a concern, and I think we probably just need to have more discussion on all of that.
So I'll just say, so the 30-day obligation is really a requirement on the fleet itself. So right now, if a fleet wanted to rent, according to the current concept, if a fleet wanted to rent an LSI forklift, they would need to basically report that information into DOORS ahead of the rental, and they would have to kind of identify how long they were going to rent it, information like that, and then they would go to you with they would get probably some type of certificate or printout, and the rental agency would just have to check that, make sure it looks all it's in the right dates and stuff like that, and then collect some information. So they're all, and all rental agencies would be obligated to take this information. Now, if you're saying, a rental agency decides to skate the rule, decides not to do it, it's like, well, then, it's like we'd have to go catch them, I guess. But what we're kind of relying on the rental agencies for, or at least the current concept at this point, is really just to kind of collect the information and provide it to us. We'll be tracking on the fleet side in terms of how many they request, and then we'll kind of reconcile that with what we're receiving from the rental agencies to see if fleets are going to different rental agencies to try to circumvent the rule. But your point about like someone saying they're going to rent it for 2 weeks and returning it in 3, that is something we've been thinking about. I'd be curious, do you have any suggestions on how we can handle situations like that? Maybe it's something we could talk about offline, but that is something that we are aware of, and we're working to find a solution for.
Well, and what makes it more difficult is we don't always rent the same forklift to the same person. We have so many different sites in California, and these things move around. So that makes it even more difficult to even track a 30-day. If it's per forklift, you could actually be renting more than 30 days to something. So it's just, we need a lot more discussion on that. The 30-day window seems very, very short. Seems very something that we have to sort out as far as how it's going to be managed. I just don't know at this point in time, with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of transactions and the multiple rental stores that we have in California, to try to manage it, to make sure that we don't get into an enforcement situation. And that's always a scare that, hey, we're just a rental agency. We're not the end user, and yet here we're getting enforcement coming on us. And that's a real concern. The other thing that is a concern is we don't have this same kind of restriction on in diesel doors. And we're a rental company that rents everything. And to have one type of transaction requirement on diesel operation, diesel rentals versus rental of other types, just makes it a very complicated system. And this is probably something that needs to be more synchronized, maybe less documentation, things like that. And, if it's just on the end user, you talked about a check and balance, and that still comes back on the rental company. And so we need a lot of discussion on this. This right now looks to be a situation that needs to be resolved.
Thank you, Bob. Yeah, I look forward to talking to you more about how we structure that. Thanks.
Okay, next is Matthew Moravec. I've unmuted your microphone. If you unmute yourself, and please state your name and affiliation.
Hi, my name is Matthew Moravec. I work for McClone Construction, structural concrete former company. So my question and more concern is towards the remote work site. Even the majority of our projects are still in metropolitan areas. However, we're coming straight out of the ground, and there is no infrastructure to present or even try to charge any type of lifts. And something to think about, what you guys would want to look at of more of a exemption, or how you would want to address a work site location.
think one of the questions we have is like, you know, are LSI forklifts used at remote work sites generally?
Correct. And yeah, and absolutely. We use, you know, we can have upwards of 5 to 10 forklifts per site out there working.
Okay, well, Matthew, do you could you reach out to us maybe after this work group meeting so we can kind of like discuss the situations that LSI forklifts? Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Matt.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, and I'm not sure. It looks like Brian Harris still has his hand raised again. Brian, I'm going to unmute you. Let me know if that's correct or not, and if it is, please again state your name and affiliation. Thank you.
Yes, this is Brian Harris. Again, I'm with Pape Material Handling, and my question is back on the rental question, and I appreciate the commentary from both the Holt and the Quinn groups. We're a rental company and a dealership. In the lift truck world, many of our customers in the state of California that rent equipment on an annual basis are in the agricultural industry. And so picture a crop coming in and it's strawberries or it's almonds or it's artichokes, pick something. And that they rent the forklifts for the seasonal need, and notoriously a seasonal agricultural customer will rent equipment for 2 to possibly 3 months, and then they get rid of the equipment because they don't need it the balance of the year. Many of those customers rent LSI engine lift trucks because it works well in their application. The infrastructure requirement to go to a zero emission could even be impossible based on the power company providing the electricity to the buildings where now potentially chargers would be required for those seasonal requirements. I think this is something that has to be evaluated and reviewed because of the tremendous impact on a very specific industry that stems from Northern California to Indio, California, depending upon where these people are. And in many cases might be a little remote because the packing sheds are not necessarily in downtown Fresno, California. They're remote to a particular region and may be limited on the amount of energy that facility could bring in to handle 20 or 30 chargers for a rental season. Anyway, I think it's something that has to be reviewed because I'd hate for you to cause tremendous hardship on a very important component of the California economy. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
Okay, next we have, hold on, I also got a bunch of hands raised. Mark Farman, your mic is unmuted. Please unmute yourself and state your name and affiliation. Oh.
Maybe we should go back to the written comments.
Okay.
We have quite an extensive list here that we have to get through.
Okay. Yeah, Mark, I guess, isn't responding. Okay, that sounds good. Go back to.
We'll catch him on the way back.
Okay.
So I have a question here from Terry Turney. Says, I'm a commercial landlord and own one 8,000-pound propane forklift that is shared by 8 tenants that is used less than 500 hours per year. How does this affect me under the current concept? If that forklift is not under 200 hours per year, then that forklift would have to be replaced at some point to a zero emission version. And then let's see. Anybody else have a question to take while I go look for this other one that I'm supposed to handle? Okay, that's okay. So Bang Low, this is Bang from Phoenix Motor Cars. Will there be incentives, assistance programs for companies to transition towards zero emission? I kind of addressed this earlier. We are looking at incentives. The Carl Moyer program is available today, and they've recently updated the guidelines so that it's easier for zero emission equipment to be funded. Of course, that program is administered by the districts, and so whether the districts are interested in funding forklifts or not is at their discretion. We're also talking to the folks who were managing the Clean Off-Road Equipment Voucher Incentive Project to add some dollars there, or to carve out some dollars there for smaller businesses that want to transition to zero in the forklifts that we're covering in this rule. And we're going to continue talking working towards maybe developing maybe a low interest loan program, or I don't know, there's some other ideas out there to help kind of offset the capital costs of this equipment. So we are working on that front. And so thank you for that question.
Okay, and I can take one from Brian Go, who asks, if diesel forklifts are exempt from the rulemaking, are they also exempt from the 13-year replacement requirements? Diesels aren't covered by this proposal, but note please that they are covered by an existing rule that's the in-use off-road diesel vehicle regulation, which is currently in the process of being amended to make it even more strict, and it includes that separate rule includes requirements to turn over to newer equipment, including phasing out tier 0 to tier 3s. I stuck in the written responses the link to more information about that rule that covers diesels. And then similarly, Edgardo and Gonzalez asks, do we have to remove all types of vehicles that are not zero emissions, including those with DPFs? And DPFs are for diesels, and this rule doesn't cover diesels. So I refer you to the off-road reg to find out what's required there. Thank you.
So there's a question here from Daniel Langmaid. Is there any focus on hydrogen-powered forklifts, or is this intended to specifically be for electric? So the answer to that question is that this is a rule that would phase out LSI forklifts. And so so if you wanted to use electric or hydrogen as a replacement, this rule does not speak to that. It's up to you, up to the fleet, what technology they choose.
Okay, I can take a question from Allison Torres, who asks, did CARB consider retirement based on lifetime hours rather than model year? Public utilities use forklifts for brief durations, so usage is overall low. Model year retirements will result in premature retirements compared to high usage industries such as warehouses. This would add waste burden from a disposal standpoint as well. Allison, thank you for the question. Currently, the proposal is based on model year, and our primary rationale for setting it up that way is to try to set up a requirement that's easily understandable and easily enforceable. We have some concerns regarding the ability of us to enforce something that's based on hour meters, and that's part of the reason why we currently only have a sort of a limited low use provisions that would use hour meters. However, if folks have suggestions for us for how to set things up in a way that would get the same emission benefits, and suggestions for how we could make it trackable and enforceable, we'd be very happy to hear from you and speak to you about that. So please either speak up here or reach out to us separately if you have a suggestion for what we could do with hours beyond just the low use provisions that we have proposed.
Okay, this is a question here from Lisa Fashni. What is the deadline for feedback from stakeholders? And so technically, you basically can comment or provide feedback up until the actual adoption by the board in summer of 2023. But obviously, the sooner you get to us, and the earlier that we can actually, consider your comments as we develop the proposal, the better. So in terms of the reg process, like we actually send our proposal, we actually post our proposal 45 days ahead of the actual board hearing, which is scheduled for summer of 2023. But like I said, the earlier the better. Thank you.
And I could cover a similar question from Beatrice Pardo, who asked, will the proposal be available for review prior to being submitted to the board? And yeah, our draft language that we discussed today is currently on our website. It's also included in this meeting, and our point for releasing it now is to get feedback on it. So please let us know what you think. And then as David Chen outlined, we follow the Administrative Procedures Act. There's all kinds of opportunities for official comment later once we release the official proposal, including right up to speaking at the board hearing where the board would be considering the proposal.
Do we want to just go back to the raised hands right now? Keith?
Yeah, okay. I'll try Mark Farman again. I'm going to unmute you. Please unmute yourself and state your name and affiliation. Thank you.
Okay, yes, it's Mark Feynman. Thank you. This time it worked with Toyota Material Handling. Two questions, question and comment. First, on the model year, yeah, we highly would suggest following the executive order or the date on the engine itself. That pretty much as the industry, we follow that. Because if you technically went model year for a lot of forklifts, you'd find the model doesn't really change over like a 4 to 20 year period. So, that would give you a better time to reference on there. And the main one is wanted to get your thoughts on the reason for the inclusion of the warranty requirement. These are all mature products. They have warranties already provided on the machines. I could understand it with the IC because you could have a component fail that it would lose emissions. This case, if a component fails like a controller, the truck doesn't move. So you wouldn't have a case where a truck would create emissions and need to have coverage beyond what's traditionally given with the products. So just was wondering your thinking as far as why including a warranty requirement on this section.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. So, the warranty is there as the concept, but we've included in the concept because, obviously if we're going to make fleets transition to zero, we want to make sure they're going to be successful in that application and be reliable. In terms of the need, I mean, I understand what you're saying, but I guess what we'd like to do is kind of hear from fleets in terms of, are there concerns there? Do they see value in a warranty requirement? So, I mean, in the end, I don't know. This is something we're still kind of evaluating, and we still want to talk to folks about. But what I would encourage fleets to come talk to us, and if to come to us if they have any concerns, or maybe there's no concern, but whatever it is, we'd like to hear from fleets on that topic.
Okay, yeah, no, thank you on that. From a manufacturer standpoint, basically anything new or even lithium-ion battery trucks, et cetera, they're already coming with warranties that are actually quite generous a lot of times. So.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Thank you.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? Like for the electric forklifts that you're offering, what warranties you currently offer?
Yeah, the bulk of them have the same warranties as the IC product out there. Now batteries and that can have their own warranty from the battery manufacturer out there as a separate entity, except for, and some products going with integrated batteries that would be covered with the truck warranty. So you don't have a electric truck being covered any less than about the only thing that would be a variable right now is emissions control components that are covered under a specific warranty by regulation. But yeah, overall, the two types of trucks are warranted the same.
Thank you. And then you're saying they're warranted the same, but the battery is not necessarily covered?
Yeah, depending on if it's sourced from a third party or not.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe we'll take the
Okay.
next raised hand.
Yes. Joni Wolfell, I believe is the pronunciation. You are currently self-muted. Please unmute yourself and state your name and affiliation. Thank you.
I did not intend to do that, and I thought I unraised my hand, so thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. We'll move on to the next person then. Luke Weber. Your microphone is unmuted by me, and please state your name and affiliation. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. It is Luke Weber with Mitsubishi Logistics Americas, Inc. And I have a question regarding the exclusion or the exception of the rough terrain forklifts. On slide 18, you list a number of different versions of the B56.6 standard. And there appears to be some of them, some other prior revisions missing from that list, as well as the most current standard, which was published in 2021. So I think you may want to take another look at that just to capture all of the relevant publications. And then as a follow-up to that same slide, item C requires that the rough terrain forklifts have a minimum front wheel rim diameter of 18 inches. I was just kind of curious, maybe you could speak a little bit to how you arrived at that value. Thank you.
Thank you, Luke. So we for that specific criterion, we did a survey of kind of what we could find that was available in kind of that rough terrain space. And so that's how we came to the 18 inches. And thank you for your comments about the actual standards themselves.
Yeah, that's great. That's good information. I would like to just point out that the rough terrain forklift industry does have what I'll call compact rough terrain forklifts that typically have rim diameters less than 18 inches, but somewhere around 15 to 16 inches. So, but they are certified and marketed as rough terrain forklifts based on all of the other criteria you've listed there. So you may want to take another look at that possibility that you were excluding smaller rough terrain forklifts that are certified to the B56.6 standard.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, Luke.
Okay. Next is Nick Chappie. I will unmute your microphone. Please state your name and affiliation. Thank you.
Good morning, Nick Chappie with the California Trucking Association. I was just curious if CARB has data on how many forklifts will need to be turned over in 2026.
So we are in the process of assessing that and going through. We're actually in the process of updating our inventory, but we're not actually ready to talk about the inventory at this meeting. I mean, we'll probably be discussing it at our June workshop.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, and the next person is Dan Langmaid. I will unmute you, and please unmute yourself and state your affiliation. Thank you. Daniel Langmaid, are you?
Yes, sorry, I wasn't
okay.
able to unmute there.
Okay.
Daniel Langmaid with the Bay Area Air Quality Management District. Just had another question. I put it in the chat, but I was wondering, so the draft regulation appears to restrict purchasing new LSI forklifts, after 2026. I was wondering if there's going to be restrictions on, adding used forklifts into fleets, because people purchased used ones, obviously following the same restriction chart that's been proposed, but it doesn't seem like that's accounted for beyond just phasing out the older tiers. But it seems like there's a possibility to be adding some of the older ones for the the years kind of leading up to them being banned, except for the exemptions. So I just wanted to see if that was something that was purposely left out or not.
Yeah, thank you, Daniel. So according to the current concept, the fleet would not be able to buy like a forklift after January 1st, 2026. That's not zero. And based on the current concept, we are kind of that is something we are thinking about. But like the way we have very aggressive zero emission goals. So the way we're thinking right now is that if you're going to be buying a forklift, you should be going zero. But again, this is something we just want to hear more from fleets about. We haven't had a lot of fleets come talk to us about kind of how their business runs today and what their typical business practices are. But we want to hear from them. We want to hear the challenges. We want to hear be able to work these issues out. Kim, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I did want to add that we did build in, generally what David Chen is saying is correct, but we did build in some specific situations where a fleet could acquire a 25 model year 25 or older LSI forklift, and one of them would be if they're purchasing an entire business that sort of already had a reported fleet of forklifts. They'd be able, if that fleet had been complying, the new owner would be able to just take over that fleet. And then also for low use purposes. So,
Thank you, Kim.
yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Okay. The next person we will call on is Bill McGavern. I will unmute you. Please state your name and affiliation. Thank you.
Hi, this is Bill McGavern with the Coalition for Clean Air. I just wanted to say briefly that we support this rulemaking going forward. This is part of reducing the emissions from the freight industry, which are the biggest source of air pollution in California and are disproportionately concentrated in disadvantaged communities. So this is one of the many pieces of cleaning up those engines and moving to zero emissions. So we appreciate you going forward with this. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill.
And that's our last person that has their hand raised.
Okay, let's go back to, I guess, the written questions. There's a question here from Brian Harris. I think he had asked that verbally, but the question is rental question, average ag seasonal rental customer is mid-June through November each year. Average customer rents for 2.5 to 3 months. Average customer rents 10 to 20 for their season. So in this case, they could not rent LSI forklifts and would need to install the expensive infrastructure to handle the additional zero emission units for their season. So according to the current concept, that is the case. They would not be able to rent for the entire 3 months. That said, the ag industry, certain ag representatives have reached out to us, so we are working with them and discussing these issues with them. I don't know if Brian, if you feel like there are other folks that we aren't talking to and you want us to hear from them, please encourage them to contact us, and we'll continue kind of discussing these issues with them and working out solutions. Thank you.
We could keep going down that list, I guess. Question from Jay Irvine was, we have 1 to 2 forklifts at remote locations at 9 different sites. How do you see this working? We use gas or LSI because of the remote locations. And yeah, I think there was another comment similar to this. I think we do need to understand a little bit more about how much they're used and if there's a particular way we can define a remote work site. So yeah, if you'd like to reach out to us, please shoot me an email and we can set up some time to discuss. Just going down the list, what if Brian Harris asked, what is the penalty if a customer does not follow the guidance as set forth? I think there are penalties, but I don't know if we are going to be citing them during this meeting. Yeah, I think we would need to do some research on exactly what those would be, but I think ARB has a number of authorities in order to enforce the regulation.
Just high level, generally speaking, it would be tied to whatever penalties apply to regulations codified in Title 13 of the California Code of Regulations. But maybe we need to probably consult our legal staff to give you a better answer. Thank you, Brian, for that question.
Question from Brad Rice. Will there be any consideration of grants for updating electrical infrastructure that may be required? I think it's, I think we understand that's a challenge. I don't know that there will be something meaningful from the CARB side. We are looking at sort of equipment incentives for sure and opportunities there. And I think we're trying to learn more about what kind of opportunities there are for fleets who need to update their infrastructure, be that through updates due to AB 841, which is supposed to help sort of provide infrastructure funding for fleets that need it. Yeah, I think, it's something we're definitely open to discussing more.
Right, and I'll just mention that CARB is planning to have an infrastructure work group, or they've been holding infrastructure work groups over the last few months. I think that the next one is going to be in March of this year, and what we plan to do is send out the information for that meeting to everybody who's subscribed to our email list, and everybody who's kind of following this rule is welcome to attend that attend that work group and participate and ask questions in terms of like the world of infrastructure.
Question from Tom Rice, which was would a fleet of 9 LPG fleets be allowed to have one low use? Yes, they would, because it is 10%, but rounding up. Cindy Rittenhouse asks, we have multiple locations. Do you consider an entity the company as a whole or on an individual basis? Currently, it's as a whole. If this is a particular issue for you, let's discuss. I think, but yeah, I think the locations thing is a little bit tricky. I understand there's fleets that have the issue, but it's also difficult to carve out individual requirements and track them based on what location the forklifts are operating. So currently it's by entity.
David, I guess I can hop in here and take the couple questions and comments from Ben Granholm from WPGA. He says WPGA submitted a white paper for how to achieve zero emissions equivalency with propane forklift innovation, including using renewable propane, low NOx forklifts, and even the development of propane electric hybrid forklifts. If the aim is emissions reductions, why not embrace some of the affordable options proposed? Additionally, I want to share that some of this technology is available today. Others are on the near horizon, but will be thwarted based on CARB's market signals in this proposed regulation. At the very least, we encourage CARB to consider propane innovation in the number of instances raised by stakeholders citing concerns with regards to cost, rental fleets in the field, etc. So thank you, Ben, and thank you for the white paper. We did We did read it and definitely appreciate the work that went into it. As we mentioned, we're under a direction from the governor to be pushing the entire fleet of off-road equipment in the state to zero emission wherever it's technically feasible and cost effective. So that's one of our primary drivers here. The reasons behind that are both related to reducing criteria pollutants like NOx, as well as kind of looking at the state as a whole about how the state can achieve the very ambitious CO2 reductions required to stabilize the climate. But we definitely appreciate your comment and would love to talk with you further about, like you said, some of the narrow situations where zero emission just may not work. And you definitely have a point that there could be a really important role for propane in those situations. So I know that we'll be reaching out to meet with you guys individually and to talk in more detail about the white paper that you submitted. So thank you.
Okay, why don't we go back to raised hands? Well, I guess we only have one. Why don't we just go hit that one and then go back, and we'll jump back to the written questions after.
Okay, Andy, and I'm not sure I'm going to pronounce your name correctly, but I'll give it a shot. Shetlin, I believe it is. I'm going to unmute your microphone. Please state your name and affiliation. Thank you. Please unmute yourself. You're self-muted.
Yeah, my name is Andy Sheitlin. I'm with Pape Material Handling. I guess my question for you is, have you guys done studies on the infrastructure it's going to take to convert a lot of these? I sell forklifts for a living, and I know single phase chargers have been banned for sale in the state of California, and there's still a lot of old infrastructure out there, and to convert that would cost a lot of money. So I would just worry that when if this is put into place, or when this is put into place, there's going to be a lot of other issues with not being able to even sell a charger in the state to a company that has an offsite location that only has single phase power. So I'm not sure if you guys have done any studies on that, looked into that at all, but just something to think about.
Yeah, thank you, Andy. So, what we're hearing from, the California Energy Commission and like the major utilities is that they can make the infrastructure can happen. But I would say that, if the work group that I mentioned that's going to be occurring next week, not next week, in March, in March, is, I definitely encourage you to attend and express those concerns there. We'll be tying into and participating as well. I'm not sure if we'll be panelists, but we'll be listening in for sure. But like we are doing, there is an effort underway in ARB kind of on the infrastructure topic and kind of all of our zero emission regulations. So that work group, like again, I encourage you to attend and kind of express your comments there, and we'll note it as well for our record. And so we'll something that we're considering. But thank you.
Okay, we have one more hand raised. Mike Wagner. I'm going to unmute you. Please state your name and affiliation. Thank you.
Yeah, hello, this is Mike Wagner. I'm with Empire Machinery. Sales and service, kind of counterparts to Quinn and Hawthorne Caterpillar dealers from California. Couple things. One, agree with your comments about the need for infrastructure for these outlying and remote areas. That's something that definitely needs to be taken into account. Along the lines with the agricultural industry in your area, and oftentimes they may not have provisions for these electric lifts or charging. But I guess how my question is, we occasionally dispatch trucks, and they may come into primarily mining clients, but remote work, we might need to bring in an LSI lift. Of course, we're primarily based in Arizona, but we have a mining region there in Southern California that we service. And if we are servicing or bringing in these LSI lifts, does that automatically, does our entire fleet need to be reported? Or how would that impact us?
I'm sorry, Mike, did you say that you bring in, you're talking about forklifts that operate in Arizona? I'm sorry, could you?
Yeah, so we typically have lifts that are resident here in Arizona, but we may have a particular job. Let's just say it's a 2-week job. We have to go into a site in Southern California. We might transport that lift over in there to work around, and it may be what some consider rough terrain, but by the classification in your current language, maybe the rim size is smaller than 18, so it is not included in that exclusion. So by the definition, we're bringing in an LSI lift. Does that mean that our entire fleet now falls under this CARB reporting umbrella, or how do we approach that? With a fleet of maybe 150 forklifts, but we're only bringing 1 or 2 at a time in.
That's a good question. I mean, I think so the way the rule structure, the concept is structured now is that in order to, for you to phase out those forklifts according to our kind of 13-year-old plan, you would need to report it as a fleet that you plan to phase out. If you didn't, then that forklift would have, the forklifts you bring in would have to be zero emission. So when you say your entire fleet, I'm guessing what you're referring to all the forklifts that you bring into California to do that job. Is that right?
No, when I say our entire fleet, I'll say roughly we have 150 forklifts, and all of those, let's just say, reside in Arizona, but a couple times a year we might take 1 or 2 of those for a few weeks into your territory in California. And, am I going to, what are my options? Do I need to report my entire fleet and as a phase out plan, or do I just opt to only bring in electric lifts in those scenarios? And then I don't have to report anything.
I would say if you plan to bring in LSI forklifts, you would probably need to report the ones you are going to bring in as a fleet of a fleet. If not, then you would have to bring in like a zero emission lift. But if there are forklifts that never come in, I don't see why you would have to report those.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. Andy, can you guys hear me? Just said I was muted. I wasn't sure if okay. Andy, I'm going to pronounce your name wrong again. Shetlin, I believe it was. Shetlin. Anyway, he commented a few minutes ago. I guess he has another comment. He raised his hand again. So Andy, I'm going to unmute you and please state your name and affiliation. Thank you.
Hey, it's Andy Sheitlin again with PAPE. You mentioned Sheitlin, a work group. How do we get invited to that work group, or how do we get information on that?
So we will be sending out an invite through our mailing lists, or our email list. So I don't know if they've actually finalized the date yet, but once we have that, we will send out the information for that work group over our email list. So if you're subscribed to our email list, you will get the information for that meeting.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome, thank you.
So I'm going to jump back to a couple of the written questions. One of them was from Bobby Gustafson, which was, do we foresee any supply demand issues making these zero emission forklifts? Are there a substantial stock of forklifts? 2026 isn't far away, and the effects of COVID may still impact supply chains. So in terms of industry being able to handle the new electric forklifts, we have spoken with industry members. From what we understand, it's not going to be an issue because there already are many forklifts that are electric produced across the country. So absorbing, more in California is not going to be hugely impactful. I think, as we understand it, California is probably a little bit more than 10% of the sales in the country, but all these are national manufacturers.
Okay, question here from Matthew Moravec. It's, what is the definition of remote work site? And that's something that we kind of are seeking input on. So I would just encourage you to come talk to us, and so we can try to nail that down. But thank you for that question.
I can take a question from Julie Johnson, who asks, I'm unable to get Carl Moyer funding for vehicle engines that are phasing out on my delivery truck fleet. So why should I believe your promise of utilizing this funding source for our propane forklifts? Thanks for the question. We're not intending to promise that anyone will get any sort of specific incentive funding for their specific situation. We have programs available that are intended to help folks meet requirements ahead of time and help spur new technologies. But we definitely recognize that the proposal that we've presented here today would impose change and would impose cost on folks who are listening today, and we're not trying to downplay that or hide it or minimize it. This is a requirement that would be a big deal for folks. As David Chen mentioned, in many cases, if the forklift usage is high enough, we expect that affected operators would eventually see savings. But changing over to a electric forklift does present a cost, and we're not promising that there'd be state funding to cover that in every case.
All right, there was a question from Harmony Gates. Will there be provisions related to infrastructure in the event there are facilities that need more time to install or transition into zero emission technologies, a potential backlog on availability, et cetera? Again, there's, stay tuned for the work group meeting, but in terms of this regulation, I think we are seeking more input on how we can better document, like if we were to include some sort of infrastructure exemption, we need more evidence of how we can document when a fleet is in the process of getting infrastructure upgrades. If there needs to be any sort of delay, I think we're relying on fleets to sort of make their case on any type of exemption that we're going to need at this point. So yeah, I think it's certainly, we're open to discussion, but as of right now, that is not currently in the regulation.
Okay, here's a question from Terry Rose. Can you expand more on the rental limitations? How many can a company rent per calendar year? So the rental is, the exemption is 30 days per calendar year that you can rent an LSI forklift, and there is no limitation in terms of how many forklifts you rent on any of those days. So thank you for that question, Terry.
I can take one next. Greg Stevenson entered a number of questions. The first is, would the widespread availability of renewable propane change any of these proposed rules? No, not under our current thinking, although we're always happy to discuss if folks have suggested changes for us. Will fleets that operate in attainment areas be treated like micro enterprises? Current CARB rules, or many current CARB rules, treat attainment area fleets as small, no matter their size. We haven't currently included any sort of special provisions for attainment areas. I don't think we probably would entertain that, because one of the main purposes of this rule is to encourage transition to zero emission and we're thinking about well-to-wheel CO2 emissions, for which if an area is an attainment area or not, that doesn't really matter for CO2 purposes. But again, happy to talk further if folks think we got that wrong. Greg Stevenson also asks, what is the reason for limiting 200-hour per year low-use forklifts to 10% of a fleet? Our thinking there is we don't want to set up low-use provisions that provide sort of a gaping loophole for getting around the need to transition away from combustion forklifts to zero emission. And so we're trying to put some boundaries around the low-use provisions to sort of prevent any sort of gaming like that. Okay, and then Greg Stevenson also asks, has any consideration been given to having an LSI fleet emissions target that reduces over time rather than cutoff dates? And I'm very glad that Mr. Stevenson raised this. This is, we have received at previous workshops and work groups and in some of our written correspondence, we have received the suggestion that, hey, wait, why are you having this model year phase out? Why not have something more like a fleet average requirement? For example, like CARB's in-use off-road diesel rule has a fleet average requirement. Our initial thinking here was we really wanted to set up something that's simple to explain, simple to comply with, and simple and straightforward to enforce. With some of those older rules, there have been some real issues with enforceability. When you're talking about a fleet average, particularly one that's averaged across everything a company owns in multiple locations across the state, it can be very difficult to enforce. We want to make sure this rule is enforceable so that we set up a level playing field so that, you know, fleets that are investing as a result of these requirements have a fair situation, so they're not competing against people who are avoiding the requirements. So so that's our current thinking. However, we do recognize that with the model year phase out that we proposed, it could sometimes present some odd situations. Like, what if you're somebody that happens to own all forklifts of one model year? And so under our phase out, it'd be like you'd be required to do nothing, do nothing, do nothing this year, do nothing this year, do nothing this year, and then boom, in 1 year, you'd have to turn over all your forklifts. So we recognize that that could be an issue, and if some affected owners of forklifts want to come talk to us about whether it would make sense to build in some sort of option to, you know, prevent that sort of very large requirement in one individual year, we'd be open to discussing that. But we just need to make sure that whatever sort of option like that we built in would need to be, you know, have clear reporting and be enforceable. So definitely, if folks have detailed suggestions regarding having some sort of fleet average option, please come and talk to us. And I think that covers all of Mr. Stevenson's questions, so thank you.
Okay, I think there was like a few questions about like supply chain and, you know, what are the availability of forklifts are going to be. And I don't know, I mean, if there are concerns, I would suggest people come talk to us. We haven't heard anything specific on from any supplier that they won't be able to provide these forklifts. But obviously it would probably be something we would be watching as the compliance date approaches. But yeah, if you have any like specific data you'd like to talk to us about, please just come reach out to us. We're happy to discuss with you. Thank you.
I see a question from Jay Irvine asking, is there going to be resources available to build the infrastructure for charging all these electric vehicles in remote locations, since the trucks and forklifts are pushing that direction? Is CARB also discussing what companies can do if there are power shutdowns? This push to electric could shut a company down until power comes back up. And do we know if the state happens to know if this is going to address the increased power needs and power shutdowns? And yes, I think those sorts of questions are great questions, and I think they will be discussed at more length in the upcoming infrastructure work group. I think it's something that we are definitely listening to, but you know, we're trying to make sure that, or I guess the state is trying to make sure that the infrastructure is, I guess our grid is being upgraded to the point to be able to handle this additional capacity and improve reliability. But I think in more depth discussion is on infrastructure and capabilities of the grid. It will be at those other infrastructure work groups.
So there's a comment here from Christine Campbell. Are there any planned agricultural exemptions? So our current concept is a reflection of pretty much kind of our current thinking, and right now there is no specific exemption for ag, unless it, you know, the equipment falls under one of the equipment types listed that we've already kind of explicitly excluded. But you know, that said, we are open. We are still in discussions with agriculture stakeholders, and so but what you see is kind of what reflects our current thinking. Thank you, Christine, for that question.
I can take a question from Brian Gonzalez, who asks, these proposed requirements are created solely by CARB and not by the industry. Who will pay for the equipment and infrastructure? And that's true. This is a proposal that's being put forth by the state government. And, you know, we're trying to keep in mind the needs of the breathers and the need to stabilize climate, and as well as being cognizant of the impacts that our proposals will have on affected business and forklift owners, and definitely understand there will be some costs associated with complying with this. And so that's part of the reason we're here today and seeking input. So please, you know, speak to us at this work group or privately if you see elements here that you think aren't feasible or you think we need to make any changes. Thanks for the comment.
There is one hand raised. Maybe we should just take that comment right now. That's from Bob Shepard, and I just unmuted you.
Thank you. A few minutes ago, there was some limit again on the 30-day on the rental, and it confused me. So if we have 100 or more LSI propane forklifts in our rental fleet, is it 30 days per rental or per forklift, or 30 days in total for any and all? That was what was confusing.
So, and Bob, sorry, I forgot to ask for your affiliation. I know you're Quinn Cat, right? So it's more of the 30 days is on a per fleet basis. So it's not applying to the rental agency themselves. It's the fleet that is renting them. And there's 30 days in the calendar year that a fleet may rent at least one forklift.
But Okay, okay. I'll not belabor that point. The other thing of big interest, if you go way back to the initiation of all of this, there was discussion on fleet average, and in January, I provided an actual very detailed fleet average. And a lot of the reasons there, you asked about impact. In one fell swoop, based upon the model year, we're looking at almost 30 forklifts in 1 year. And there's another year where we'd be hit with 15. And this is in our operations, not in our rental fleets. I haven't even included any of those, so well more than 29. So it gets back to the what the huge impact that a model year schedule seems to play in this versus a fleet average. And I do go back, Kim. The fleet average indoors, it is very enforceable. It's very manageable. It has the elements of, hey, if you didn't meet your fleet average, you didn't meet your turnover. It's in black and white. It's online. It's there. Yeah, there might be people that have elected not to report something, but that's going to happen in this regulation as well. So the fleet average, really, I think you need to take another look at that as a potential for very, very large fleets, especially. So anyway, that's my 2 cents.
Well, thank you, Bob, for that comment. Maybe we need to have some additional discussions. Obviously we chose the model year approach because it is easier to basically enforce. It's much clearer in terms of like a requirement. But I don't know if you have any. Maybe you can kind of contact us, and after we can flesh that out a little bit more. Thank you.
I can take a couple comments from Augie Venetia. Sorry if I'm not saying that correctly. Who says, Kim, your comment about achieving carbon emission reductions and stabilizing the climate, climate change is already rolling forward and won't come to a stop for millennia. Thank you for your comment. We got to do what we can. And you also ask, is CARB working with CPUC over the additional infrastructure needed to electrify California? Yes, indeed, we are.
I guess I'll take his related comment here. It says, David C., based on your comment about ARB working with Energy Commission, based on all the cost overruns and delays with the train to nowhere, how does the state and utility companies expect to get additional infrastructure put into place in a timely manner? Will it mean roughshod over environmental regulations? And so, Augie, I'm not an expert on the topic of infrastructure, but what we are hearing from the experts, the Energy Commission and the CPUC, is that the infrastructure can happen. Like I said, if you have concerns, I encourage you to participate in the work group meeting we'll be having in March. I believe it is the panelists include both ARB folks as well as folks from the CEC and CPUC. So it's an opportunity for you to kind of pose your concerns and questions to them. We will be monitoring it as well and seeing how that goes. But yeah, so I guess my recommendation is that you just participate in those work groups. Thank you.
And just to make sure that everyone gets the benefit of the comments that are in the that are being typed in, Brad Groders notes there are off-grid charging solutions that can be used in the field. For example, FreeWire, Mobi, and Beam EV Arc. So thank you for that information.
Okay, there's this question from Brad Rice, comment. Thanks for your answer. We have already implemented 50% of our lift fleet as electric and are tapped with our electrical infrastructure, and reason for my question regarding grants availability. Yeah, so Brad, I guess if you have specific challenges for your fleet, come talk to us. We'd love to hear from you and find out more about what you're dealing with over there. And again, like I encourage you to also participate in the March work group meeting to talk about infrastructure. They cover a variety of topics. I don't know in that specific meeting, but the goal is over multiple work group meetings is to cover multiple topics. And I believe infrastructure grants or incentives is one of the topics. Thank you.
And Brad Rice asks, is there a specific person or phone number for following up with you guys? I'm going to paste into the chat here the emails and phone numbers that we shared in the presentation. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us.
There was a question here from Cesar Jimenez, and it says, for rental allowance, is there a fleet allowance or limitation on the number of units in the rental fleet? Do these units fall under the model year phase out? And so there is no limitation on the number of units you can rent. It's just the number of days per year you can rent. And the second question, they do not fall under the model year phase out. They would not fall under the model year phase out.
And Brian Harris submitted a comment, forklift retrofit conversions not financially feasible for a standard under 12,000 pound capacity forklift. Thank you for your comment.
Another question from Cesar Jimenez, for the low use exemption, can you provide more details around the forklift label that's required and how customers would source them? So we define just the specifications in terms of like, the lettering height, the label, the size of the label, color, stuff like that. But in terms of like where you source them, we don't dictate that. You can source them from anywhere as long as, they stay on there and they're readable. That's so again, that's who you source them to would be at your discretion as a fleet. Oh, go ahead, Kim.
Okay, Cindy Rittenhouse says, as a company with forklifts, considering the investment a company makes when purchasing forklifts, a warranty is important. Thank you for that comment. It's really helpful for us to know we are considering including a warranty requirement for zero emission forklifts, but we don't want to put that in place because it's going to definitely impose cost and inconvenience, a lot of work on our end and on manufacturer's end, unless it's really desired and needed. So Cindy and any others that are thinking about this, please let us know what kind of warranty you'd want and why you think it's helpful or necessary, and that'll be really helpful for us in formulating our proposal.
Another question from Cesar Jimenez, for dealer and rental agencies, until what model year can you continue to sell, rent out model year 2025 and previous LSI forklifts? And so right now there is no limit on how long you can do it. It's just basically as long as those units are still running, you can continue to sell them or rent them. Thank you for the question.
Okay, and Curtis Clark states, generally we don't have a model year. The serial number, which is stamped on the chassis, would be related to the year it was built. technically we would have model year 2025 units all the way to build slots through December of 2025. Okay, thank you for that comment. Really glad folks brought up the model year details. I think we'll need to make sure we sort through that and define it clearly in the regulation. So really useful discussion on that. Okay, a related comment from Dan Miller, who says Olive Carb's current regulations base compliance and emission ratings on engine model year and horsepower. Considering VIN or serial number for unit model year would make regulations unnecessarily confusing. Thank you for that comment. We'll think this through and definitely have more detail on this at our next work group or workshop.
Looks like we have a few hands raised if we want to jump back.
Okay, yeah. Gary Cross, I'm going to unmute you. Please state your name and affiliation. Thank you.
Yes, Gary Cross for the Industrial Truck Association. I had, I guess, 3 questions, if you could take them all. The first would be, has CARB given any consideration to a provision for small fleets? So this would be distinct from low use or rental, but it would be some recognition that if you have a really small fleet, you might get some kind of relief, if nothing else, a delay. Has there just been any consideration of that concept at all?
So we're not giving any consideration for small fleets, but we are giving consideration to micro businesses.
Yeah, but to me, those are quite different concepts. Micro business is not necessarily the same as a small fleet. You could be a non-micro business, but still only have, say, 2 forklifts. I would just ask you to think about that. I think the LSI fleet rule did have a small fleet provision. So I'm thinking about something comparable to that to consider.
Yeah, I would just say my perspective is that if that company does not face, you know, unusual challenges, I guess, to go zero, why wouldn't they? Why couldn't we make them go zero? I guess is the kind of my perspective on that. You know, I can understand if they have like financial challenges, you know, like, you know, because they are just a small business. But you know, if like I'm like a huge company and maybe I only operate 3 forklifts because, you know, maybe it's just to move reams of paper in my basement or something. Why can't we go zero with those? I mean, we're open to continue these discussions for sure, but at least that's kind of my perspective at this point.
Okay, well, I guess my thought is the same reasoning that led you to have a small fleet allowance in the LSI fleet reg, but nevertheless, we can try to make a case for that later. My second question has to do with diesels and the idea of preemption. I think in your regulatory language, you state that this section, which is the very first section, does not apply to forklifts that are subject to Federal Clean Air Act preemption, which as applied to forklifts would be all forklifts below 175 horsepower, because they have been defined as used in construction and ag. But you also have a provision, which I think is on page 8 of your regulatory language, that says, if I understand it, you would not be able to replace a propane forklift or an LSI forklift with a diesel forklift. So I'm just wondering if there's any inconsistency there, or if I'm reading it correctly. What do you mean by saying that you are recognizing the role of federal preemption in this reg?
Yeah, so you know, the federal preemption applies to our ability to adopt new standards for farm and construction engines used in farm and construction equipment under 175 horsepower. And as you in our concept, you can see that we are adopting a zero emission standard there, and so we felt it was important to is very important, is more important to best to just to clarify the preemption language there. In terms of the LSI, not being able to replace an LSI with a diesel, that's just, we're trying to, we're obviously in the current proposal are leaving out diesels, but we want to ensure that leakage isn't going to happen, right? So folks aren't just going to go from LSI to diesel. I don't necessarily think it's directly related to the preemption, except in the cases when it is in a farm or construction application.
Okay. And lastly, on the rental, if I am a user that needs temporary LSI forklifts for say 60 days, could I then rent one forklift or a dozen forklifts for 30 days and then turn them all back in and rent another dozen for another 30 days and be in compliance with the proposal?
No, I think it's meant that each fleet has that 30-day limitation. So yeah, we didn't want to make a loophole like that where a fleet can continually do a bunch of shorter term rentals. So yeah, they have to add up each day that for a fleet, they have to add up each day that they rent the forklift over the course of a given year.
Okay, but I could rent 50 forklifts for 30 days each.
If they're all the same 30 days, then yes. So to say, okay. If they're all, yeah. So if I rent one forklift I don't know, did that make sense to you, Gary? Or
well, I'm trying to think it through as we're talking here. It seemed to me, according to the language that you have so far, and maybe you'll refine it, that what I suggested would be permitted, and I was just trying to make sure I understood it correctly. And you're saying you certainly did not intend that result.
Correct, yeah. So I think in the example we had from the presentation, this particular fleet rents every December because that's when they have their surge of need. And so they can rent, they rent from December 1st to 30th extra forklifts, and they could rent 10, they could rent 100, or they could rent 1,000 forklifts between December 1st and 30th. That's their 30 days. But if they go and try to rent a forklift also, some other time of the year, they would be exceeding that 30 days.
Okay, so they could do 1,000 forklifts for 2 different 15-day periods. That'd be okay?
Yes.
But they all have to be the same period, if I understand what you're saying. Okay, yeah. Well, let me think about that. It seems to me that it might lead to some kind of strange results when you compare those two situations. 2 forklifts rented each for 30 days is a lot less emissions than 50 forklifts, rented for 30 days. So I wonder if you're, aligned with your goals and the way you've got it structured, but I think I need to think about it some more as well.
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Julie Trost asks in writing, does the regulation include battery or equipment disposal guidance? No, it does not.
Daniel Langman has a question here. Is there a restriction on adding modern equipment to a fleet indoors? For example, I see that there are phase out requirements, but if an operator purchases a used LSI unit after 2026, is that restricted? And so there are 2 conditions in which you can acquire an LSI forklift after January 1st, 2026. And one is if you're just acquiring it as low use, and that would be, you would have to report that forklift into doors if that's what you wanted to do. And then the other was if you were basically taking over another business and their fleet was being phased out by that other business as well. You can kind of merge your two fleets there and continue the phase out of that fleet that was acquired through a business takeover or transaction. I'm not sure exactly what you'd call it, but basically you're taking over the entire business, including all the assets. Okay. So just time check, we're almost running out of time here. We'll try to go through as many of these written comments as possible, but it's just, another question from Daniel Langman. I see CARB is intending to have a zero emission manufacturing standard in section 2433. Is anything being drafted to update the requirements in that section? Doesn't look like anything specific to zero emission. Yeah, you're right, Daniel. We're going to flesh that out some more. The point of putting that in there was to just kind of signal the intent for us to have manufacturer requirements in there, so we just wanted to kind of put that in the document to kind of communicate that intent. But yes, we are planning to do more work there and flesh that out. Thank you for that question. Another question from Daniel Langman. Has any thought been put into the lack of infrastructure and the possibility that entities will need to operate generators to charge their electric forklifts? You know, we've kind of spoken to the infrastructure things multiple times here. Obviously, we don't want people to operate generators to charge their forklifts. So, I mean, if there's information about like that could kind of illustrate the risk of that happening, I think, that's definitely something we want to hear. But again, it's like, we've been hearing from the experts in this area that infrastructure is going to be there. And if it is, then I'm not sure why people would want to go to a generator. I mean, unless it's a remote worksite issue, in which case, again, please come talk to us about that. We'd like to find out, to hear more and understand that more.
Okay, Mike Wagoner asks, hello, we're a company based in Arizona that provides services to mines in California. We may occasionally bring an LSI forklift into California, but we have 150 forklifts in Arizona. Do we have to report our entire fleet or only those within California? Only those within California. Nasim Awaddi asks, is the 10% limited to company-owned unit or is it specific to multiple locations? It's for the whole fleet owned in California.
Question here from David Alvarez. Once we purchase a 2026 zero-emission forklift, will we need to report those units indoors? And no, but if you are operating low-use forklifts, you might want to report them indoors for that purpose, because there is a 10% cap on the number of low-use forklifts you have. So if you're, to the extent that you're expanding your fleet, you may find it advantageous to report it, but otherwise it's not required.
Okay, Nicholas Dirks asks, is it possible to incorporate a backed alternative compliance option like in the off-road reg, or one where a percentage of forklifts are retired per year rather than all from a model year at once? For example, if a fleet owner had 10 forklifts and 8 of them are 2013, replacing 80% of their forklifts in 1 year could be difficult. Thank you, that's a valid point. And as I said, we're looking at whether we need to have some sort of option like that. So we'd love to hear specifics from folks. One other area I wanted to mention that we really would love to hear back from is, as we've talked about a couple times here, we are proposing some pretty strict restrictions on fleet's ability to add used forklifts. After 2026, it would be only in very narrow circumstances would someone be able to add a used SI forklift to their fleet. We would like to know from owners of forklifts whether you currently have the practice of often buying used used forklifts and whether that would impose, a hardship for you. Does anyone have a problem with those requirements? Please talk to us.
Edgardo Gonzalez asks, from Northgate Markets asks, our forklift fleet is now 80% electric. Are these forklifts need to be replaced by 2026 for new forklifts with 2026? So zero electric forklifts do not need to be replaced, if that's the question. This is a question. This is a regulation addressing forklifts with large spark ignition engines.
So David Igus and David Chen, are you guys able to stay on for a couple minutes to address the remaining questions that we got in writing?
I think we can try.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
And so we're trying to go through all of them verbally. If someone submitted a comment and we messed up and we didn't address it, please don't be offended. Please reach out to us individually, and we're very happy to talk to you individually. I have a conflict at noon. I'm gonna have to hop away for a couple minutes myself, but I'll try to come back in a few minutes. Thank you very much for those of you who spent 3 hours with us this morning. Really appreciate the questions and comments today. It's been very helpful.
Thank you, Kim. Okay, so harmony gates, and I think maybe we already addressed this one. Will there be provisions related to infrastructure in the event there are facilities that need more time to install, transition to zero emission technologies, potential backlog on availability, et cetera? Again, those are things that, if you see them as real concerns or challenges, please come talk to us. We love to understand those issues a little bit more, or understand those issues more.
Jose Ariola asks, our municipality only has one LSI forklift, but has a total of 110 employees. How are total employees determined? Do we qualify for low use? So one interesting thought here is that we did set up some special requirements for a micro business, but we didn't consider the fact of whether any municipality, whether we might have any like really small municipalities that might need to access those provisions. So if anyone has a suggestion for us for addressing municipalities that might be tiny, please let us know. Anyone have anything to add about how we determine total employees? I'm not sure how we define that.
So the employees is based on the form they have to file with the what's that? The Department of General Service. No, what is that? The EDD, Employment Development Department or something. And so I believe it's like whoever earns a wage in that quarter is counted towards the number of employees. And basically that's how the Department of General Services determines whether a company meets the micro business definition or not. So it's that, and then the tax returns for annual gross receipts. Question here from Joey Giordano. For the low use exemption, you mentioned you would round up. So for example, if the size of the fleet is 52 forklifts, is the number of allowed low use forklifts 5 or 6? And so it's going to be 6 because we're allowing fleets to round up.
I can take some of the questions from the bottom side, David. Just work our way up. Please clarify whether, Allison Torres asked to clarify whether zero-emission forklifts can be used towards the total fleet count for a 10% low-use allocation. Yes, they can. In the current LSI program, there's non-fleet less than 3 lifts. Will that still apply? No, not as we're currently proposing. We're only looking at micro businesses.
There's a question from Man Altaher, and it says, can e-forklifts displacing the LSI forklifts be used in the LCFS incentive program, assuming a new EER becomes available? There's nothing in our program that would prevent that from happening, but I can't speak for the LCFS program specifically. I don't know if there's anything in there that would prevent you from earning those credits. Something we can look into, though. Thank you for that question.
Okay, comments from Brian Harris saying customers do buy used forklifts and if they're less than 13 years old. And so it should be allowed to allow them to continue to acquire those. Thanks for the comment, Brian. And Christine Campbell said, I agree the rental limit of 30 days is confusing and will cause issues for fleets. I think we'll need to clarify that. There's a certain reason we developed it that way, which is specifically trying to eliminate loopholes. But you know, if it may be a communication issue, or you know, certainly sounds like we're going to need to clarify the way we're explaining that provision into fleets. I'm not sure if you guys did this one. Ryan Huggins said, what type of compliance enforcement mechanisms is CARB contemplating, and when will that be included in the draft rulemakings? The enforcement is not, the specific way it's enforced is through the doors reporting, and then it could be subject to field visits by enforcement officers, but that typically is not spelled out in rulemakings exactly how CARB is going to enforce it. It's just that you must follow the rules, and if you don't, there will be penalties. But all of that, those are not specifically spelled out.
There's a question here from Peter Isho. Once the phase out is complete, will we still need to register our fleet and doors? And for most fleets, no, unless you're renting or you qualify for the low use and you have a low use forklift. In terms of the phase out, you would not need to continue reporting once you've submitted the final report, basically notifying us that you've completed the phase out.
Okay, I'm not sure if I'm seeing that many more unique questions.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so we are over time, and I appreciate everyone staying on. You know, I apologize if we weren't able to get to everyone's questions, or if we left anyone out. Yeah, please, you can still submit it. We'll review it afterwards, and you can also email us or reach out to us, and we can schedule some time to have a discussion. So yeah, we're definitely looking for more individual fleets and businesses to reach out to us and to discuss. And so with that, again, reiterating that, you know, I want to thank everyone for joining us today and providing a lot of really great feedback. And we appreciate your time and insight. And we look forward to future discussions as we continue to refine the proposal. So thanks, everyone. And I think with that, I'll be concluding the webinar. So have a good rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.